My goal is to have this be more of a discussion as to how we move this effort forward in the North Country here versus a typical workshop. But like I said, I'm going to cover some basics for people watching at home. I just, I tell my summer campers, I ask them what do you need to survive, and the usual list we come up with is air, water, food, shelter, and I always throw love in there. I lump culture in there, but babies can die from lack of human contact, so you gotta have the love. And then I ask them, to really catalog in their life how accessible those things are. Once you've cleared away all the clutter of our modern civilization, how in touch are you with your basic life support systems? And air, we can go 5-8 minutes without getting brain damage, but it's readily available. Water, you're going to be 3 days and get pretty thirsty. In my life, living off the grid in a shack as a teenager, I could just go over to the Sekia and dip a little pot of water out and boil it. So for me, that's not a challenge. Love, thankfully, I've got a community who puts up with me. And shelter is easy to make a link to, although in the winter here in the mountains, you definitely need that to survive the night. But food has been a long-term challenge for me as an adult. And anybody who's tried to sustain themselves in this environment knows that this is probably the hardest place to grow food on the earth, other than maybe the Tibetan plateau. But if it's not the sandblasting of your seedlings, or the hail from a thunderstorm, or the drought, or the deluge, or the early freeze, the late freeze, or just the lack of degree days, the overall lack of heat through the season here, it's a challenging place to grow. So when I got my farm, I definitely was not coming from a foodie point of view, although I'm all about slow food and delicious food, and I feed my kid organic stuff, and I was coming at it from a food security standpoint. And so I got this farm, and it was a blank slate. I wasn't sure what I wanted to grow. I had a feeling I wanted to grow stuff that wasn't readily available at the farmer's market because people were better at vegetables than I am, and I didn't want to necessarily be involved with that many people and refrigeration and things like that. So I kind of was leaning towards grains and pulses. And then I was approached by Andre from Wild 11, and he wanted me to grow this heritage Sonoran white wheat. So I said, I got advice from Dan Carmona, who's a master farmer up there in my area, that you should never plant anything you haven't sold. And so I said, sure, Andre, let's do this wheat. And I went down that path. My farm had been previously farmed by a man named Gogo, who was part of a cooperative in the North Country in the 90s and aughts called the Sangre de Cristo Growers Cooperative, I believe, which was involved with NMSU and had been egged on by this man Willem, who Cloudcliff Bakery. So my farm had been farmed with wheat previously. There was equipment laying around, so it was an easy entry for me. And if you're interested in growing wheat at home, you can do it in a planter box, you can do it in a raised bed, you can do it in a furrow system. I'm doing it in a broad acre style where it's planted on flat ground with a seed drill that's spaced 6 inches apart. The wheat is basically the easiest thing to grow, as far as I know. I've been able to grow it, so it can't be that hard. Basically, a grass is incredibly tenacious. So given the option, it's going to grow and it's going to be fruitful. And it does well up in this area. I don't know the particulars of it. I know there's kind of when my wheat's coming to, it's drying down, there's a sort of inverse relationship between the amount of water I put on and the quality of the grain. So I can make a shriveled up wheat, which is a super high protein, really great wheat that bakers will love. I'll get less of a yield, Maybe it's the challenge of growing up here that makes good wheat. Maybe it's something with the altitude. Like, I think I'm surrounded up there in Costilla by people growing alfalfa under center pivot sprinklers, and they grow premium alfalfa that they sell to the dairies. I don't know if it's something with the altitude that makes the wheat good, but
what would be some different challenges, whether you're in the mountains or on the mesa and in between? Any challenges you would identify?
Well, here you need to have water generally. People do dryland stuff down in the southeastern part of the state. I've never been bold enough to do that. So everything I do is predicated on laying the groundwork to apply water to wheat, which makes it more challenging than in being in the prime wheat country, Nebraska or Saskatchewan or whatever, where they just throw it out on the ground and grow it. I have to do a lot of mechanical interventions to prepare the land to receive the water. Trying to get away from that, trying to get towards the no-till. Don't know if it's possible. I've had some misadventures in no-till so far. I'm sure Ron can speak to that as well. But it's just such a short season up there in San Luis Valley. It's a challenge. So
yet there's still a community of growers up there.
the San Luis Valley is big ag, yeah.
Yeah.
And people do grow some spring wheat there from time to time. It's usually in a rotation for more profitable crops, is my understanding.
Yeah.
But there's a commodity system there. There's grain dens that you can sell into.
Yeah.
But down here, we don't have that infrastructure, and that's a big part of what I think we should talk about today. Is that while wheat is the easiest thing to grow, once you get to harvest, it's much harder than taking your cucumber to the farmer's market. There's a lot of process involved.
I'd love to get a show of hands who's interested in growing wheat or is currently in production. Ron and Bud? Yeah, and so how many acres are you on for the wheat specifically?
Oh, this year there was a couple acres.
Couple acres, great. And Buck?
About 1.5 country.
1.5?
1.5.
Yeah, awesome, yeah. Just good to have it.
What about those of us who are interested in processing wheat?
Exactly, yeah, it's part of the chain as well. So what are you interested in specifically?
Well, more along the lines of brewing and then distilling.
Absolutely.
Than baking, but yeah, like I own houselightning.com, and you know the recipe from the Mountain Man days used the Mora wheat, which I guess it's easier to grow in Mora than up in the San Luis Valley wheat. And they also did a lot of baking. Well, they deliver wheat to the U.S. Army Ford and Fort Union. That was the big demand, and they'd bake a lot of it into bread, but they'd also brew a lot of it into wheat beer and then distill it into Taos Lightning. Add chili, tobacco, and gunpowder, age overnight.
Close out for anybody at home who wants to grow wheat. You plant it, you water it. I water mine 3 times in a season because I'm flood irrigating and it's a little more of an ordeal. I'm sure it could stand being watered more consistently and less of a deluge and produce a finer crop. But at the same time, I think it likes to be challenged at times to get that protein content up. The protein content is the glue that makes the bread. So most people place a higher value on higher protein. I've been growing the Sonoran mostly, and that is a winter wheat in the Sonoran Desert. I tried it out in my valley, and it did not overwinter. So I've been planting it as a spring wheat, and doing spring wheat style. I'd love to get a variety or just keep pushing that Sonoran to overwinter or whatever, but
We've had luck with fall planted. I mean, it's been a hit and miss, Sonoran.
yeah.
This year wasn't as good or as productive.
In the banana belt.
Yeah, 2,000 foot lower. The competition, of anything fall planted is just a lot easier than what's spring planted.
Yeah, it's got a lot going for it. So I'd like to, ideally, I'd like to be working with like Ernza or some these people working on perennial stuff, because tillage is the devil. I would love to, I'm so envious of my neighbors with their alfalfa. I'm out there
Are you looking for seed or?
yeah. Yeah, there's also a perennial rye that they got pretty close. I mean, it's it'll go for several years before it peters out.
I think there's a few places around here that are trialing the Kernza for the Land Institute. There's a few farmers in the area that are trialing grow-outs of Kernza for the Land Institute. And so I think if you were really serious about it, I have been on their website and they're looking for more people.
I applied some years ago, but maybe their seed stock was so limited, I didn't make the cut.
I think they're making progress on the seed stock.
Yeah, they were looking for, well, 25 acres or better, wasn't it? They
Yeah.
were interested in
Yeah, they
small
had a
farms.
limit that was way higher than what we could do, but that'd be way cool.
Yeah, for the home gardener, you plant the wheat, you have to make sure it's got water in the stage when it's sending out more stalks that can bear heads, and make sure it's got water when it's creating the head and the bottom of the stem, where it's selecting how many kernels it's going to have. Make sure it's not water challenged when it's flowering, and then you probably have a good crop. But the challenge comes at the harvest. If you're on just a garden scale, you can get out there with a sickle and cut it down. And
You don't need a hammer?
Is that what you did, or yours, acre and a half?
Well, I started out with, it was a 1949 case pull behind.
Okay.
But by the time I put it behind the tractor, that's 14 foot, and I can't get down through a lot of gates and paths where we are. So I spent a little time on Alibaba 2 winters ago, looking at China, where small scale equipment is available, and ended up with a little machine. It came without an engine because I couldn't get a diesel engine through the coil. So we motored it, it's got a 3 foot. And so the intention was, and I say it kind of out loud and still kind of imagining, that this was the tool that would make other small pieces more realistic. Small pieces meaning, I think, I haven't really challenged that, but I think I could do 5 acres in a day. It's a 3 foot bed.
yeah, if you're a home gardener, you just cut it down, you step on it or put it through your hands, and then you toss it in the basket as the wind carries the trash away. And the combine I have and the $500,000 combine that somebody in Nebraska has are basically, they call it a combine because it's a combination reaper, thresher, and winnower.
Should have been said combined.
So they've combined those operations, and it's there's really no difference between mine mechanically and a modern one. It's just they have more sensors and more proprietary software. You can take a brief nap as the GPS guides you through the field, but basically it's a knife that cuts it down, a paddle wheel that gathers it and conveys it to a rasping cylinder that beats it all to heck, and then various screens and fans that separate the seed from the trash. And so that can be done, like I said, non-mechanically by hand. It's just a matter of scale. Ron's working with something I think which is really appropriate for most farms in this area, that level of mechanization.
The idea is it can be transportable. I haven't yet. Time hasn't really, I haven't scheduled myself that way very well. But putting it on a trailer is an intention, and we'll see. It could happen this fall still.
Yeah.
It turns out, well, Daniel, you referred a few people that sounds like there was, a fair share of grain planted this spring, waiting for a combine to show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it might. Hey, Daniel, to what extent do you clean your combine? I mean, what grain is still in it?
Well, I've been playing around with lentils and peas and other different things, so I clean it out the best I can. I'll take a fire hose at the end of the season and wash the whole thing.
And you can it pretty completely. I mean, you got just a trace of something left in there.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with mine is it's so big that once you get going, once you get it tuned, you're already 5 acres in to where it's cleaning well, and then to clean it out, it's 9 acres. That's why I think you're talking about one of those research combines where they're meant to be cleaned out easy.
And really specific. And even this little one, I mean, the past year with the Rio Grande grain team, we did a number of varieties. Chris, did we do 12 or 15 different varieties?
We did 6 that we did grow outs on, and then we did 3 smaller grow outs, and then we had about 15 trial plots. Yeah. Because we're growing out turkey red, Sonoran white, einkorn, white einkorn. These are our bigger grow outs. And then we did medium grow outs of Sorvento, Poltavka, Barak-Durum, Jamu,
Blue stem or the blue church.
I don't count that, that's your stuff.
No, it was in that.
No, I know, but that's your thing.
Well, and then there was Tibetan barley.
Tibetan purple barley, we did really well with these years.
Sonoran.
And rye, we have had tremendous success with rye.
Well, the challenge with that little combine, still as we do these many different varieties, I mean, I'm wondering with the bigger stuff, it's a challenge to clean a machine well enough for a seed crop. I mean, one thing to take it to the mill, and that's okay, but for a seed crop, cleaning out a combine between crops, I wondered how the big one fared. And
It's
you
got a
made
lot
side there to
of
find
nooks
some
and crannies.
Yeah.
So how do you market your harvest, or do you process
Oh, we're
it
not at
yourself?
that point yet. What, our idea is to increase the seed stock, because these are grains that are pretty much quit being grown. Sonoran white has had a big resurgence, and so in fact, we just learned the other day that Tim Voss and those guys, Schneiders and Voss, they have 60,000 pounds of Sonoran white right now, which but the rest of the stuff is, started from tiny handfuls, and it's just being grown out. And
Right.
the interest is in these ancient or
Yeah, the
heirloom,
races.
right, as opposed to the modern,
Right.
right? So it's just in the, we don't have,
Right.
what do
You're not
we got
putting
next?
it into products.
Well, this year's,
Not
there's
yet.
enough finding, you start with 50 seeds at a time, we've got varieties that we've got, some amount that we plant finding an acre. But that's about 4 seasons of grow out, the tiny stuff to see what could succeed. And all of us just learning from, scratching the dirt and putting seeds in it.
See how it
Protein and
tastes.
stuff and taste. We haven't ever even had enough to bake with yet.
I've grown triticale for the last few years just because it was an inexpensive start, and that's not a really ancient thing. Maybe 100 years ago they developed triticale. And that's what we
I've just made a concession that me on my 60 acres with my ancient combine, I'm not going to compete with somebody with 25,000 acres and a 40-foot header running day and night, So we're in a quality business, I think, anywhere in Dallas County. Bob Quinn. If anybody's interested in reading about wheat, he's got an interesting guy, but he did a study, and it would indicate the pre-industrial revolution, or green revolution genetics are not just not inflammatory, but they're anti-inflammatory. I don't know if the Sonoran is old enough to fall into that category.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's hard to say what it was called before it got to the Sonoran, right? I know that. When the Spanish brought it, yeah.
It came to San Gabriel with Oñate, and that's the first thing they planted was the Sonoran, because they wanted to make the host,
The wafer.
the wafer, yeah. So they came in 1598, and they planted in 1599, and it was the first crop.
This is Grain by Grain by Bob Quinn. It's an interesting read for those reading at home here. This is Small Scale Grain Raising by Logston. I found that informative. Here's a guy grabbing some grass, a biological farmer. That's pretty good stuff about your soil testing and whatnot. It's about crop rotation. This is from the SARE initiative.
Yeah.
That useful.
They do a lot of things.
This is an old school guy in Australia, the kind of the basis of keyline design, Water for Every Farm by P.A. Yeoman. And again, if you're growing here, we have the major advantage of not having Monsanto overspray and all kinds of nasty bugs and stuff, but we do have to add water generally. This is really great.
Power.
What's that?
It is keyline power in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Development tools.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing at the camera too. That's
Sure. So once you've got it harvested, the question is how do you eat it? And you can boil berries like rice, and they're like little tiny corn kernels, and they're quite delectable. But most people like it in their bread, which is why I'm glad I stumbled into the grain, because I feel like if you're an advocate for local food, there's no more universal entry than bread products. Everybody's eating a donut or a loaf of bread or a tortilla, or not everybody's eating the kale. So I think it's an opportunity to gain widespread acceptance of local food. The question is the price point. So we can, on our scale, we really need to exist in the high-end artisanal market. And the challenge is how do you get food justice, and how do you get more widespread distribution of local food when you go down to Super Save and get yourself a bag of flour for $20, 50 pounds. It's hard to compete with that. So
Small, it's a scale and dream of, I'll get $8 a pound for Ethiopian blue emmer this fall if I can produce it. And that's just 1,000 pounds. But I mean, there is a, select market, artisanal markets for, we'll see.
yeah. So the challenge is how do you get it to that market? Some people that are really, really into craft baking and such, they'll have a home mill and they want the berries. They'll pay more for the berries because they can, everything's better fresher. But in terms of wide distribution, there needs to be a value-added process, turning those berries into powder.
How big is your mill?
It's a 30-inch stone mill, which is more mill than I need. So it was a cooperative mill, and I hope it to be. And I'm working on that. That's a whole nother, there's the growing of it, there's the processing of it, and then there's the distribution of it.
Right.
We worked on that with the Local Food Coalition. So that's the next, I'm not a very good businessman, but I do have the ability to make flour at this point. Andre's using some, Willem's using some, Micah's soon to use some for the farm to school, the North Central Food Pantries be using some shortly here for distribution in the food pantry.
And you mentioned your formats, 50-pound bags.
Yeah, I had initially thought I didn't want to mess with anything less. I wanted to deliver a pallet of 50-pound bags because I got enough getting to that stage. But really looking, I applied for a value-added producer grant this last cycle, and really looking at the numbers, it's hopeless. I would never be able to, the goal is to hire a mill operator and a front office person for that stage, and it would never work in 50-pound bags. So my goal now is to deliver a pallet full of totes full of 10-pound bags.
Put on 50s between 10.
That's a hard one to set. Mount Mama up there, I think, is $1 a pound. And
he's charging us for Rouge de Bordeaux, $1.40 for berries, $1.50 for flowers.
it depends on what your basic whole wheat, I think, varies.
Yeah.
And then there's a guy near Austin who I was used to doing similar stuff, and he's like, I wouldn't let it out the door for less than $2 a pound, wholesale. So it's really hard to set that.
What, plain corn's around $7 or $8 a pound flour or more?
I just bought 25-pound bags of einkorn berries from Golden Organics in Colorado for $4 a pound. We're a bunch of nutball bakers, so we just buy large quantities. And we actually have started grinding, milling the flour in countertop mills, and we're trialing selling freshly ground Rouge right now, but maybe some others at Community Resources in Santa Fe. It's a farm stand, and they have a CSA and stuff, and so we're just trying to see if there's a market for this freshly ground,
Yeah, there's definitely, you can do direct to consumer, and the challenge is if you want equity, so you want a low enough price point that people can eat food, and you want farmers to exist, then you gotta cut out the middle person. So that's the goal of the mill, is to get enough margin on that value added.
Fair trade.
Yeah, so to run the mill to where there's just the margin to keep the mill going, and that excess is poured back into the farmer, and then hopefully there's something for the food bank as well. The COVID situation, there were minor perturbances with our food supply, and people that are of a food security mind were like, ooh, this is interesting. And people that were entrenched in the food system were like, hey, it's resilient, cool your jets. But it was food for thought. So I was out there in the field, having taken on my 100 acres of flood irrigation, and thinking like, in the slight chance that this perturbance is going to be, more than just a hiccup, and the supply chains are more interrupted because of weather or work shortages or fuel shortages or whatever. What does it take to feed Taos County? I got into this because it's part of my personality. I'm a local food guy, and people say you're great for growing this food. But really, when the rubber hits the road, what am I able to produce to feed my neighbors? And it was an interesting thought experiment. Supposing you could hermetically seal the borders of Taos County, and you took the Mormon survival diet, because they're of that mind, and they want to provide for their flock. They recommend 300 to 400 pounds of grain per person per year. And that's with some supplemental other stuff that you're going to eat. So if I were to endeavor to produce that for Taos County, I would need, I figured up there in my area in Costilla and across the border in Barroso, there's 28 center pivots or something like that. I would need all of that to produce the millions of pounds.
So you mentioned building soil, and I was just wondering, for you and your experience, for adapting to this climate in particular, what have you found to be the best practices for building soil and reducing topsoil erosion?
I've tried to apply my water judiciously, so I'm not just blowing it out all the time. There's a balancing act in terms of your scale, in terms of what's been done on the land before. If the soil's really been hammered, you're going to have a hard time growing in concrete slab. So I've been trying to kind of navigate that. I was a little discouraged this year because I went out there in my field, and there are all these little peepers and insects and things, and I went out and started up that tractor, and at the end of the day there was just vast desolation. It hurts to work so hard doing something you don't believe in.
And that's what you're talking about, you want to do no tillage,
Yeah.
it wasn't working.
Yeah, but it's you're a little bit on a hamster wheel with the tillage.
Yeah.
The one thing I've been able, I think I took a lot of people would have started small and done things really right and grown it. I just started throwing stuff into every corner of my land and tried to make maximum life happen via my tractor. I'm not sure that was the right approach, but one thing I've been able to do within that system is that I haven't taken the straw off, which is common practice in wheat because you can gain some more money from the straw bales. So I've been putting at least that much more organic matter back. I've had a few rotations of legumes, field peas and lentils and blue beans and things like that. Not as much as I'd like, because I just kind of got on this, I need to produce this annual crop every year. The reality of this, so you can't, people that do no-till organically, and first of all, no-till is a great advancement in
So that's good in the Midwest.
Oh yeah, no, it's an amazing advancement in terms of our collective problem of exhausting our topsoil 300 times the rate of replacement, and washing it down the Mississippi and placing it in the Gulf of Mexico where it doesn't do the fish any good.
Right.
No-till is a godsend for the agro-industrial complex, but it's heavily dependent on herbicides to keep
the history of soil preparation. I mean, in the Midwest, where they've been working that soil for 100 years, and they don't irrigate the way that, I don't know what Daniel's doing for irrigation, but I mean, not irrigating old work soil and herbicides, meaning you save fuel and you save machinery by doing no-till.
Yeah.
And it's not as ethical maybe as we like to believe with no-till. And we're learning about no-till.
Buck, did you have
Seeing
something
different
to add to
results.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to say something. I'm super grateful for you and the method you took on, kind of like doing way more than one man should really try to take on at once, kind of a crash course style with the grains. But so I'm like you, to where I came into farming as more of an activist and environmentalist and love for the people and the land and the water, and wanting to be able to have a sustainable culture. So one thing that I found is really important with growing grain here in the valley is our acequia systems, and which you also use acequia water, correct? And so we have so many people and such a population growth here that we're taking out so much water that we're drying up our wetlands and putting a lot of strain on our Rio Fernando, Rio Pueblo, all the rivers. It's we're extracting more water than we're putting back into the ground. And so I had at least 9 acres this year. 6 is irrigable, and I planted 4 acres. I'm just one guy, too, trying to do what I can out there. But I needed to fill in about 1.5 to 2 acres or plant something that I can harvest, something of substance. But also, my mission is to put water in the ground, is to use our water rights from the acequias to replenish the aquifers, to help the rivers, to keep the culture alive. Where I'm at over there off Ranchitos, if we did not have the acequia system, we wouldn't know any of our neighbors there. We would drive into our farm, drive home, end of the day, and leave away hi to the neighbors. But instead, I know 20 people up and down the rivers and the acequias, and we all have a community, we call each other, we support each other, and so being able to have an area on the farm that we can just water and saturate the ground, which is basically taking water out of the rivers during high runoff periods, spreading it out, letting it saturate into the ground, and then it slowly seeps back in to support the rivers. And everyone's wells, everyone has clean water around the area because of our agricultural practices. And so, but there's no way that I could, have a mill or the equipment that you have, or even ever being experienced in games with small acreage and stuff like that. So you being able to pioneer that and then allow smaller farmers to use our water and water rights to sustain our aquifers and wells, and it's really the blood of the community, or the water for the community. It's really helpful, and I just want to thank you for that.
I think it was something stated that approximately 80% of flood irrigation water is back in the water table. 80% of it on flood irrigation.
And that's using acequias?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I think the missing link we alluded to is the harvesting. This mill is there for people to run their material through. It's a question, it's an open question, because there's a series of cleaning tables, and they're going to be linked with conveyors, and there's it's a balancing act between scale and doing anything at all. So it's an open question how much custom work the mill can do in terms of that question of cleaning things out, having discrete batches of different seed stocks. I hope these, I have extensive cleaning machines now, and I hope they can be a resource for seed saving of all kinds of varieties. We can keep buying different tables for the gravity table, different screens. And
You have a gravity table?
have a gravity table, have a stoner, have a high cap drum type cleaner, and also a fan mill type cleaner. So we can clean some seeds. So it's a question of, with this mill
Don't
cooperative.
let him anywhere near all that. Just saying.
related, or?
We work together.
Enough.
So I haven't used that stuff enough to know what the minimum order it could be for custom jobs, but I would hope that people with small holdings can run their stuff through, or at least combine it. We can have some system of grading to where it's compatible enough that it can be under one label or whatever, that we can run that stuff through. I think the missing link is that harvesting equipment, and I know you have your limits.
Well, the limit with mine is I kind of overestimated 24 hours in a day into longer than reality, and that's been the
I have that
limitation.
problem too, yeah. Everything to me can happen in a day. There's no other increment of time, so that'll take a
I
while.
wasn't counting on that.
So is it a labor issue?
Yeah, my labor limits.
Huh.
That's a labor issue. Well,
The end of Carmona has overcome
well, I'm a farmer, not a boss.
Okay.
And, you know, that's kind of a difference. I mean, I can work with people, but I don't like being an employer. I'm not good at that, or employee either. Yeah.
So I think somebody in Taos needs to get a tow behind or something that can go through gates, that can deal, you know, I don't know if it's the land trust or if it's. who's gonna do
Well, I
it.
know, a tow behind, yeah, that can move and clean out, and a single operator. I mean, you know, combine's not something that just anybody hops on and, well, it's like any tool, you know, you gotta have a little experience.
Pardon me, Ron, but do you know about the ag event happening this weekend? Or next weekend after next, the 28th, at the Farm Gonzalez Ag Center?
Yeah.
There's
Where?
gonna be a big collection of folks in that circle,
What,
and it's at the Farm Gonzalez Ag Center right here,
Uh-huh.
from 9:30 to 4 p.m.
And
And that might be a good place to bring up some ideas like that.
well, the idea, again, is, I mean, with any combine that can transport, it needs a single operator that goes with it. And just passing something around is trouble.
Yes.
So Ron, does a BCS not have an attachment like this?
They do, and it's the same story again where you can't, I mean, most everything outside the country seem to be diesel engines. And now it's, the EPA has raised that standard on diesel engines where a majority of those diesels, Lamborghini was a great Italian diesel engine on a lot of those tools, but you can't get it through the courts these days.
Yeah, but they make gasoline and gasoline engines.
Well, that's what I did with this combine. I mean, we brought it without a motor, and then with a few modifications and some head scratching,
Okay.
yeah, we put gas on it, which is doable. So any of them, I mean, BCS, Kubota, a lot of manufacturers of small-scale tools, but it's not really that acceptable to, or accessible to non-mechanical people. When you get the tool, you just don't have an engine on it.
Okay, but you can buy a brand new gasoline powered BCS.
Yeah, I think so.
When people in the San Luis Valley grow wheat,
But there's a pressure, I mean, the combine is a different tool than a tiller. You
Yeah.
can't buy a tiller at all.
So that's what I'm asking is, does BCS make one that's attachable to the BCS motor?
Oh, they make the whole tool, I believe. BCS makes a rebar.
Talking about-
I would guess,
They make a combine.
yeah, I would guess that the combine takes some horsepower. I don't know if you could put it like a snowblower on your BCS. Maybe, I don't know.
Actually, I know you can.
19
What do they do?
A small snow.
Colorado.
No, I mean,
I have one on order, but
the walking tractor that we all know is a BCS, I'm not sure would be able to.
Yeah, there's not a combine head that you can put on a walking tractor.
okay, that was my question. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
they make
you.
a reaper, and it's
Now I
like
get
an
it. Okay.
individual machine also. They have a line.
So it would basically be a larger machine, is what we're saying.
Yeah, I agree with Ron, there's on my combine, there's 9 adjustments that you make from front to back of that thing that are all kind of interrelated and hard to trouble, so it's a skilled operator that needs to kind of approach to give you a good job.
Well, this little
Not
tool
to
that I
trash.
have is really, yeah, it just takes a little experience. I mean, you wouldn't want to just set somebody on there and take them to the field and go for it.
Right.
And that idea was kind of shared sometimes, a tool that can be shared. There is the
There's
Southwest Grain Collaborative.
a whole combine culture in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah, when people grow in the San Luis Valley as part of their, they subscribe to their extension agent regime, and when they grow the wheat, they're selling it into the commodities market, and there are fleets of combines that come over Levita Pass from Kansas, because those people can make payments on a $500,000 machine, and they have enough of a season there that they can be going around roving
South of the North.
and doing custom work. San Luis Valley all comes due at once, so there's a horde of them that come over all at once. So we would have that same problem in Taos, that a machine would need to be able to cover if we had any level of production, we would need to cover acres pretty relatively quickly. get everybody down.
And Buck, we'll get you
Talk
in just
to
one
Tony.
second here. Just want to do a time check. We got 20 minutes left. Just FYI, anything you
Thank
want
you.
to cover. Otherwise, keep it flowing. Buck, what you got?
I want to be that guy. I want to be the house combine guy that goes around with the tractor and the line.
Right on.
I mean, I already go around for the house land trust, and I see, I've probably done 25 acres in town this year. Hay mules, weeds, and different things, and I have a tractor service business, and I'm
So we
working on
have
that.
a
I'm working on getting funding and finding the right combine, and in the meantime, really looking around.
Do we have a state representative who can get some support from
And so,
the state?
yeah, Mike.
So I'm going to draw an analogy to photovoltaic panels. 30 years ago, photovoltaic panels, no one expected the price to drop the way it did. But people did build that stuff, and they built off-grid systems, and they used it in space, and then slowly but surely, more affluent people could start buying, solar panels and putting them on the roof. And, I was going to go into grad school and study, solar energy, and I did for a while, and that was, 25 years ago. And then I gave up, and I was told that Exxon had put in, $1 billion worth of research into solar panels, and then they gave up. You know what? Exxon just didn't wait long enough, because the price did come down. So, what if Taos, the community, starts with an artisanal tortilla made from your Sonoran wheat that costs a lot, that initially is only bought by martyrs, okay? And you pay an extra premium at, just as an example, some burrito, stand in town, and you say, hey, if you want the Sonoran wheat tortilla, you got to pay an extra $1, maybe an extra $1.50. And just start something to get that market going. And then somewhere down the line, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, I'm just going to propose, eventually something will happen in all of our systems to make it more efficient, more possible, more affordable, and then it becomes more commonplace.
So is there an online community right now where wheat farmers are talking about that?
There's lots of them.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to replicate,
Yeah.
like Colorado Grain Chain,
Yeah.
Maine Grain Alliance, the Northeast Grain Shed Alliance. There's all over the country, and it's what you're talking about in terms of artisanal bread and using these grains, besides in bread, but in pasta and in pastries and in tortillas. It's happening, and we're like, I feel like we're at the kind of crest of this wave, and there's a bunch of bakers, at least in the Santa Fe area, that are doing this either with a private group list of clients, or doing pop-ups, or doing...
Christine, do me a favor and send me any of those groups, and I can advertise that to the platforms.
Yes, please.
TCITs.
I want to buy that tortilla.
Because it's a great
I want to buy the
conversation.
tortilla that you milled it, and he seeded it, and whatever.
We just want to do that.
And I want to be able to hype it up.
And we don't
Sell
want
t-shirts that
to.
said,
We don't want
I ate
to.
a Taos tortilla.
Thank you, Mike. We don't want to reinvent the wheel or anything. We want to.
No, it's
project
happening.
and-
It's happening all over the country, and we're just catching up to, I feel like, or re-catching up, because it was happening in the 90s, right?
I mean, the hippie days, they were in the whole grain.
Right.
And I think what's changing now, hopefully,
Introduce myself.
I don't know a whole lot about trends in USDA and whatnot, but the food system is the way it is now by design. It was designed by industrialists trying to crush rural communities to get factory workers and feed them cheap food. The food system, I think the USDA is starting to get hip to you need to put carbon in the ground, you need to have local food. So I feel like local food is a trend that will continue to gain steam.
Folks, if you could quiet down with the presentation going, please. Thank you.
I think it'll gain official steam. I think funding will be forthcoming. I don't think we'll have to wait too long for local food.
Hey, there's more wheat planted in Taos and Rio Arriba County this year than there has been in 60, 70 years.
Yeah, and it was alluded to, it used to be the breadbasket, it used to be every little hamlet would have a little folk mill, and there'd be a miller there that would take their toll, and it was a thing.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to finish your question about the no-till. Ron can speak to I have hillbilly no-till with a regular drill. And it worked okay. Buck has been no-tilling. The organic no-till is already a challenge because you have to terminate these cover crops. It's a further challenge if you have to delay your cash crop to do a cover crop for the whole season. You don't have these shoulder seasons where you can do different, play around with different stuff. So if we can do it, anybody can do it. So it's gonna be a test. I read that book by, he's the guy up in North Dakota. He's like the no-till guy.
Gabe Brown?
Yeah, I read Gabe Brown's book. And he says, call me and ask me anything. So I called him and asked him.
He did.
Yeah, I read it. And his book had removed a lot of my reservations about better practices, like, it's too cold, you gotta warm the soil up, and not enough water. He's in North Dakota, it's cold, he gets 14 inches of rain. So I was like, well, okay, no more excuses. And I called him, and he said, well, talk to these guys in the San Luis Valley, these brothers that have a potato cooperative there. And I called them, and they're like, oh, we don't. They're like, we gotta do it.
Is there like a hybrid between like no-tilling and tilling? Like, aren't there kind of hybrid
It can
things?
be more moderate. I mean, disking is,
Have you had any luck?
salad disking. Well, this is really only about the third season we've really been working with the wheat fields. And I've rarely plowed, but I've oftentimes tilled or disc.
Yeah.
So there's a different scale of how much soil disturbance is happening or needed or avoided.
And I don't want to paint
What crop follows what crop. I mean, there's a whole lot of planning and understanding the past to get forward with regard to, I think, a more profitable or more productive no-till system.
I'm highly motivated not to run my tractor as much as I do. And I don't want to paint a picture like my farm's a wasteland. Once everything's planted, I mean, there's cranes landing in my ponds, and there's salamanders wriggling around it. It's beautiful.
Let's circle back to Christina.
Thing. But at any rate, yeah, I'm going towards the no-till.